Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. It's Wednesday. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm delighted today to be joined by John Hughes. John, we must have put it out there. We put the call out there to the universe that Celtic should just go to Dublin and play a game of football, and lo and behold, it's happening. What did you make of that? It seems like a decent decision.
It seems like a decent decision. Yes, it's a terrible decision, and I'm furious because it is, in fact, my granddaughter's birthday. Which is the reason why I couldn't come over for the Roy Aitken thing. So despite the fact the game's an hour down the road, we've got two sets of great grandparents flying in. The game's at 2:00. I've tried to wangle it every possible conceivable way, but, you know, I wouldn't be back until 6 or 7. Yes, I'm raging. But it's a great decision. I mean, for people like me, under normal circumstances, that's fantastic. I got a phone call of friends of mine this morning. There's still very good seats going, premium seats going in the halfway line. So that would be absolutely brilliant. I am so disappointed, but it's brilliant for everyone else here, especially, I mean, obviously, I'm in Newry, and Newry has a very, very big Celtic contingent around this area and in Dalton and so on. So there's a massive Celtic fans who'll be over the moon about that. So fair play to the club. And it is a great decision. And obviously, someone's just listening to the podcast, Paul John. I mean, it was. You could say really we just organised it. You know,
well, we did. We done all the heavy lifting, John. The thing is, yesterday when we mentioned it, you find out some really, really interesting information from the commenters. So please keep the comments coming in. If you want to make a comment, subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Everything's free, and then you can make your comment. But people were saying that there is not as much interest in Celtic as there used to be, and I find that obscene to consider that. I'm obviously in Scotland, and I just take it for granted in many ways, not as much as a club. But Celtic are always going to be massive in Ireland. We've got a huge fan base, obviously, coming over to all the games, John. That saddens me a lot, and a big reason for taking the first team over there for a competitive game, and I don't mean competitive in so far as it's a domestic game of football, competitive in that Wolves and Celtic really need a tough game of football under the belts at that stage, and taking it over to Ireland. But it's something we need to do more regularly, clearly.
Well, it's very much the dominant teams here are English teams. Mm-hmm. If you go outside of, like, in Newry or certain areas of Belfast or the rest of it, you wouldn't see Celtic tops. You see Rangers tops for a different reason, but you wouldn't see a lot of Celtic tops about. But it's all Arsenal, Man U. You ask any kid that's grown up here, if their parents don't have a Celtic connection, then it's always an English team. Always an English team.
We need to do better there. We definitely do as a club. And I know that for many seasons, John, we were really entrenched in fixtures during the pre-season. There was a spell there where we had so many qualifiers for Europe that it was impossible to do just about anything. It was maybe what we've got at the moment is a summer camp, but I think we need to make that a priority and do it on a regular basis. Fair play to the club for taking our advice, John, and setting that game up against Wolves. And it's in the Aviva on the 29th of July. Jungle Lion, yes, you are in the comments section, and hopefully we will get over at some point, if not for that game, then sometime in the future, to do Acsom live from your incredible man cave. Is that what we call it? Are we allowed to call it a man cave? I don't know. My studio basically is a man cave, John. It's just fully all the stuff that my wife won't allow me to take home. So we're looking forward to that. It's going to be, for me, insofar as a competitive game, probably the toughest challenge we're going to have during this pre-season. The pre-season, in terms of games, starts today. And I find that a really interesting time to have a look at Brendan Rodgers, Mark II. Version 2, John. Look back to what we were getting when we brought him in first time round, where the club were, and compare them both. And I'm looking at it on 4 different kind of points, 4 type criteria, if you like. The shape of the club, and what I mean by that is the various processes that were not in place when Brendan came in, things that he implemented and introduced to Celtic. Kevin Graham calls them elite processes, things that he had brought over from Liverpool, for example, John, and implemented it at our football club. Secondly, the squad itself, the quality of the squad, the harmony within the squad, and you compare that to the squad that he took over from Ronnie Dyler. The recruitment, it's huge. We could tie that into the first point, of course, but it's hugely improved this time round, and we're going to have a look at that. And then Brendan Rodgers himself, John, and whether or not you think he is actually a better manager for the experience that he's had in the 4 seasons that he was at Leicester. So we're going to be looking at all of that, as well as things like Callum McGregor with his new contract, Kyogo and Maeda, a couple of new signings coming in, more to come. But obviously, we've got a game of football at 5 o'clock, John, and it's not been broadcast anywhere.
No, I was actually searching everywhere for it this morning. I thought that'll be on somewhere, surely. And, you know, so I asked someone who has a hookie box if they could find it anywhere.
Everybody knows someone with a hookie box.
Yeah. It's just it's a guy I know that knows a guy. But he looked through his hookie box earlier on, couldn't see any signs of it. So I don't even think it's actually been filmed, other than for the club's own stats people or our performance analysis. You know, so
yeah.
I'm not sure what the crack is there.
It's really frustrating because, again, you take these things for granted, John, that any kind of level of football, the game is being recorded. That's what as I say, you just expect that these days. You expect it to be live streamed. You would expect that the team we are playing today, Portimonense, are going to have some form of media channel, social media channels, etc., and they will have cameras at the game. Alas, it would appear not. People might say, listen, it's just a bounce game behind closed doors, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. But as Celtic fans, particularly with Brendan Rodgers coming back and all these questions that we're going to be asking today, you want to see how he shapes up. You want to see things like the inverted fullbacks. Is he going to remain in that kind of shape that Ange Postecoglou introduced to us? Is he going to revert to some of the shapes? Because he's not one of these guys, John, that just sticks to the same shape all the time, and he's taken it from club to club to club. Liverpool, Leicester, Celtic, there were similarities in the way that he set the teams up. But again, very adaptable within the game. You want to see all these things. You want to see which of the new players get a run out. Are there any youngsters over there who are going to get a run out? Who's going to partner Starfelt at centre half? All of these questions, and that's why we want to watch the game. Anyone out there tell us any different? Let us know in the comments section. Yeah. But we need a game of football, John.
Yeah, I think initially, I'm not sure he's going to select a particular shape just now until such times as the personnel situation is clarified. Now, we know, for instance, that he was going to play with inverted fullbacks his last season at Leicester, and then both of those boys got injured. But in that in itself tells you something. So it's not as if he ran out of fullbacks. It was just 2 different fullbacks, and he decided then he wasn't going to play with inverted fullbacks. So he didn't think those guys, obviously, the replacements, were up to it. Does he think our guys are up to it? Realistically, at the top level, the kind of level. I mean, he's back here for Europe. That's essentially what he's back for. So does he think they can, compete in Europe as inverted fullbacks as he would like them to? Or does he feel that we'll be better off with a more stable platform at the back? How much risk is that exposing our defence to? He's going to have to weigh up a lot of things, and it's really, what we do know about him before is that he does adapt to the players that he has. He doesn't try and force people to play in positions that aren't going to be sustainable. So it's going to be interesting to see, or at least in this case here, once word leaks out, what sort of formation he's playing. But I'm not sure it's going to tell us anything in the early days. I always read a lot into these pre-season games. People always just then get really annoyed and say, well, it's just a pre-season game, doesn't tell you anything. But it tells you a lot about what he's maybe thinking about the personnel. Doesn't necessarily tell you anything about, how we're going to be playing mid-season, but it tells you about what he's thinking just now. It gives you an insight into what his tactics might be, what his state of mind is, who he's favouring, who he's not favouring, all of these things. And is he just going to throw in at this stage a load of the sort of more untried guys, which we have done the last couple of seasons. You know, the early games in the last couple of pre-seasons, there were an awful lot of sort of academy guys and you know, fringe players. And you know, the main show didn't start until a bit later on. The Callum McGregors of the world didn't start until a bit later on. I gotta just say, by the way, about Callum's contract. I just wanted to ask you your opinion on this, because I've heard people saying that essentially he's got a new all singing, all dancing contract for masses more money, so that we can break the wage barrier and get more people in. You know, at that level. My opinion on it was that he's trading a lengthy contract for, you know, security. So it's basically, if you imagine it's in the McCarthy deal, except the way it should have worked. You know, so you give him a 5-year contract, which is unusual for a player at 30 years old. He doesn't get a pile more money. Let's say he gets another $5,000 a week or something like that. He's not smashing the barrier to the point where it's not sustainable for us. But he gets more money, he gets a better deal, but he gets a 5-year contract. That is effectively security for him. And, you know, as an athlete with as many miles in the clock as Callum has, you know, that's important. That's very important to him, that stability, that security. And I imagine he was only too happy to sign a deal of that length. But I don't really believe the fact that it's, you know, just smashing the glass ceiling to make way for other people.
Yeah, I saw a couple of the kind of rationale behind that, to be honest with you, John. And again, like yourself, I wasn't really buying it, because I thought to myself that it kind of leaves Celtic in a vulnerable position if that's the case. I mean, we know what happened when we overspent, and we were able to reel it back by completely changing the recruitment model under Gordon Strachan. But it got to a point where it left us in a perilous situation financially. You know, it was unbelievable, and you wouldn't have changed it for the world under Martin O'Neill, maybe other than winning that UEFA Cup. But, you know, it was great to bring the players in, that level of player in, John, but we smashed our kind of wage structure during that period, and we could not maintain it. We couldn't continue like that. We had to make a change. So when I saw that as for me as a theory, because that's what it was really online, it was floating about, I was more in your camp on this one. I thought to myself, you know, he's going to get an improved deal. Of course he is. There might be a signing on fee. Do players get signing on fees with improved deals? Has Kyogo and Maeda had a nice wee sweetener? I don't know how that side of it works. But the thing with Forrest, remember, a few eyebrows were raised when Forrest was given an improved deal. Obviously, what was worked into that is the upcoming testimonial, for example, John. And I know that, you know, modern day players that get a testimonial, it's not a financial thing. Back in the day, it was the final payday, if you like, for all the loyalty that they had shown. Nowadays, you know, for all intents and purposes, the players we're talking about don't need the money. They will work some kind of charitable element into the big day. But yeah, they'll write that into the kind of contract. And I'm like yourself, I don't think we would smash the barrier to allow 3 or 4 bigger paid players, bigger earners to come in. I don't see the point in doing that. We can bring those players in any case. And people might say, well, you should never have a player in the club that's getting paid more than your captain. Perhaps that's the argument. I'm not too sure on that. But when I look at Callum McGregor, aged 30, and I love the stats, as you know, and I don't mean the kind of data analysis. I'm more the historical stats of players and honours, games played, goals scored, John. And McGregor has he now has the potential to be right up there in the highest possible echelons of Celtic appearances, right up there with names like Bobby Lennox and Billy McNeil and Paul McStay and Danny McGrain. And I think maybe the reason that do we appreciate him enough? Possibly not, is that it's the here and now. And it's maybe in years to come that we'll look back, John, and say, wow, you know, this guy at this moment in time as we're sitting here has won 20 trophies for Celtic. You know, he's just a few trophies behind Billy McNeil, the iconic Caesar, who has a statue, quite rightly so, outside Celtic Park, and also another one in Bellshill. And we have got a captain who is within touching distance to match that kind of level. I know we'll never win the European Cup. I know that will always set Billy apart from anyone else. But yeah, that is what we're living through right now, Callum McGregor. And I think that in the last couple of seasons, with his captaincy, not only being embraced by Callum, but him doing it in such a way that I think we've seen different levels to him that I didn't even think were there when he was given the captaincy by Ange, John.
Yeah. He's Mr. Consistency, isn't he? He's a 7 or 8 most weeks. And it's really noticeable when he dips below that, because when he does dip below that, we don't play. Because so much of the play goes through him that without him on top form, we don't function as well as we should. So it's incredible. I think as far as him going into, those sort of realms of Billy McNeil, he'd be a lot better off if he was in Billy McNeil's position. So the guys I think at the back have a lot more chance of achieving these things simply because longevity is on their side. As you know, I had a discussion with someone just the other day who was saying that they think Callum is as fresh as a daisy and will last a lot longer than the likes of Scott Brown because Scott Brown had far more games in his legs and all the rest of it. And it turns out, I'm pedantic enough that I went away and actually looked at that, and that is not the case. Callum actually has more games than Scott Brown, and then Alan Morrison chimed in at the age of 30, by the way, just to clarify, not 35 when Scott retired. But Alan Morrison then chimed in with minutes in the legs, and it's an extra couple of thousand minutes he has in his legs. Now, you've got to look at the way that Callum plays. He's very intense. He covers a lot of ground. Everything goes through him. There's no games he can coast through. You know what I mean? Because everything's going through him. Like we have some centre halves that could, get a pipe and slippers out for some of the games that we play. So, is he going to be able to sustain that kind of level of performance to, age 35, where he can get, by which point, as you say, if he maintains his performances, he maintains sort of his appearance level, he'll be at the very, very top of all the lists. I'm not sure if that's possible. If you look at athletes and, in general, tend to drop off pretty fast after 32. That's just across the board. Callum might be an exception to that. Maybe he'll go 33, 30. But that's why I think the contract until he's 35 is a great deal for Callum, and why he would have been happy to sign it. And it's a good idea for the club to offer it as well, because you've got to have a happy captain. He's very, very important to us. You want him with his morale, as high as it can be. If he's going to be a leader of men, going into the future, you need to keep him on side. And, he's certainly, he's the right man for the job. And I hope he lasts until such times as he really is at the top of all those lists. I'm not sure his game allows for that. But, I certainly hope he lasts as long as possible, because we really need him.
Yeah, you're right. And you know what? None more so was that exemplified in when Brendan Rodgers was speaking about actually having, Callum over to Mallorca for that meeting. Before everything was signed, sealed and delivered, he saw McGregor as an important cog in that whole machine, that he had to have a word with him. He had to sit down and have a meeting with him, the captain, before a decision was made on his own future. And I thought that was astonishing when Brendan revealed that during I think it was the fan media press conference, actually. So, yeah, I totally agree with that. But I think the example I used the other day, if you're talking about football, footballers who, at a young age, John, played a lot of games. Paul McStay, in that combative role at Celtic's midfield, he was playing consistently from the age of 17, but he retired at 32. His ankle couldn't take it any longer, so it didn't give him the longevity that he deserved and us as fans deserved, because very unfortunately McStay retires in the pre-season. This is bizarre as well when you look at the actual timeline. McStay retired in the pre-season that Wim Jansen took over. McStay would have been part of that team that stopped the 10. It's bizarre when you look back on it. That's when he retired, 32 years of age, yeah. And then Granty remained, but he played 2 games under Wim Jansen. And then he left, I think it was Norwich City he went to initially. But you do not associate those 2 players with that era, Grant and McStay. No. They were in the building at that particular time, but McStay just could not overcome that ankle injury. And, of course, he retired very, very early. In saying that, he played so many games, he's right up there, Paul McStay.
Okay, can I just interrupt you on that point, Paul? Not actually that point. just something that I looked at earlier on. You have an event which looks as if it's going to be a smash hit with Charlie Mulgrew and Aidan McGeady. And because of that, I was just sort of reading back, because my memory is so bad, it's really awful. And I was just reading back a couple of things. They came up through the academy together.
Aye.
But I don't think they ever played together on the senior team.
You're right.
Because Charlie came in when Aidan left. So he was signed in the 2010, wasn't it? July 2010, and Aidan was off to Spartak Moscow. And so for all the fact they played together, their paths never crossed in the senior team. And in fact, Charlie has one more league than Aidan. So Charlie has 5 league titles, Aidan has 4, but Aidan has one more cup. I think he's got 2 Scottish Cups and a League Cup. I think Charlie has 2 Scottish Cups but no League Cup, or one of those. I can't remember. But I just thought it was odd. You're talking about timings and people not being part of particular generations. I would have had those two in my head. I would have had them sort of side by side. In terms of age and profile. And you're like, well, did he not? Anyway, no is the answer.
I know, it's really interesting when you look at it, because when obviously McGeady was a prodigious talent, came through really. I think he was 17 as well, John, when he made his debut under O'Neill. So he was that wee bit ahead in terms of his development. But like you say, they'd have gone to camps, they'd have been playing in tournaments, there'd be loads of pictures in the old Celtic views of them as kids, because we used to cover all the teams at that point. At that point, Mulgrew was referred to as Chaz in the Celtic view, Chaz Mulgrew. So they've come through together. And there's that story that when they were late during pre-season to get on the bus to go and play a game, and Strachan fined them. So there is a story in that as well. So there was a bit of a fallout. McGeady was so good that he couldn't be disposed of, but Mulgrew was disposed of. And, he became then Neil Lennon's first ever signing as a manager when Lenny got the job a few years later, and they brought him back, Charlie Mulgrew. So I'm really looking forward to that event. We do have 2 events at the moment, Acsom. We do one a month. This month is Roy Aitken. Unfortunately, the big man won't be able to join us for that one, John. Roy Aitken.
No. Same reason. Paul John, just before this thing's, I've got an alarm thing here that's about to go off. So give me literally 1 second. I'll be back with you. And
no problem at all.
You talk about the events.
I'll talk about the events and bring in some of the comments. Not a problem. So Stephen Sloan, you're first in. We emergence under Brendan Rodgers, and I kind of touted Turnbull as being one of those guys. I've seen with interest a Celtic fan who is currently holidaying in Portugal was able to get a few bits of information out there to the Celtic Twitter sphere, and he was saying that Turnbull is looking extremely fit, looks like he's lost a bit of timber. Is he a player who's going to be shipped out? Like, as you say, cost over $3 million. We can't let him go for nothing next summer. We need to either give him a new contract or sell him in this window. Excuse me, John. I've kind of diverted a wee bit to another midfielder in David Turnbull. He's a player that he only turned 24 this week, and I think that has he been underutilised in the last season? Yeah, but for good reason, due to the form of the other midfielders in the squad. He will be keen to be getting games, and in particular this season. John, does he have a future? That's a big question.
Well, if he does, it needs to be decided right now. So he's, again, he's not going to have much time to prove himself. In fact, I don't think he'll get any games to prove himself. I think he'll either be given a new contract or he'll be gone, because we can't let him run down that contract. So he needs to be out. We can't have ourselves in a position where players are just running down contracts. So. I think the odds are against him simply because I don't think he's going to have time to prove himself. And I also think, as we discussed before, that Brendan is looking for players in that position. And if he couldn't crack the first team, the boys that were in the first team, that sort of trio, you assume that there might be some people dropping down there if we bring in some of the names that have been suggested. So you go from being a fringe player to not being in the squad. the matchday squad. So it's a difficult one. He is a tremendously talented player. We've seen what he can do by running games. He was so important. He has some things going against him, and but for me, it's a difficult one because I think he's a great player, a technically gifted player. And I hate to see that walking out the door. Absolutely hate to see it walking out the door. But can he propel us to a level that we want to be at? I think that's unlikely. Could he contribute? I think he could contribute. Is he going to make us noticeably better? Is he going to set us a different standard? I don't see it. But I mean, it's a hard one. I mean, he's some talent.
Yes, John, I look at him and, there's this thing now where you call a player a number 10. When that came into football parlance, I'm not sure. It just happened, the number 10, right? We never used to refer to them as a number 10, John, did we? Back in the day.
No.
But we know what that is. And Brendan Rodgers has deployed a number 10. He deployed Tommy Rogic in that position at Celtic. I think Maddison kind of, utilised that area of the field for Leicester. And I'm looking at that position again. That's why I want to watch the friendly games. And I'm thinking, is there a future for Turnbull in a position like that? Is that a position that Haksabanovic might be able to perform well in? And then you ask yourself about O'Reilly. Is that a position that O'Reilly, despite the fact that I thought he played very, very well in a defensive midfield position in Europe, is that a position for O'Reilly? People who may not have the mobility, John, because I think the three that I've mentioned, David Turnbull, certainly working back isn't his forte. Haksabanovic, I know that you loved the speed of Aaron Moy last season when he was at the club. Haksabanovic and Moy, honestly, I don't know who'd win a sprint. Or whether they would get on the bleep test, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be very high. Another one is O'Reilly, who, again, he looks absolutely lean coming back for pre-season training. He's a phenomenal talent. But I sometimes wonder whether or not, because he can unlock a defence, whether he'd be a better number 10 as well.
Well, I mean, again, the thing about O'Reilly is we do know that he has athleticism, right? Because in the games where he was standing in for Callum, it was funny. It was, especially in Europe, he was taking criticism. But then when you actually looked at his performance and his stats after the game, stuff like that, and when the emotions weren't quite so heightened, he did really, really, really well in that position. So we know he has athleticism. Does he have what you need from a number 10? Does he have that level of sort of instinctive trickery? Which is, I think, why I would prefer Haksabanovic even over Turnbull. Turnbull, to me, is a more studied player. He's a more, he thinks about what he's going to do, and in that, what you want for someone playing in that position, what I want anyway, is that sort of touch of instinctive genius. They make things happen that the defence can't prepare for. Because your man didn't know he was going to do it until the ball was sort of at his feet. So, I see that more of that trickery with Haksabanovic. But, if Haksabanovic doesn't get a run in that sort of position, he's going to be out the door quick smart as well. Because Rodgers wouldn't have a winger that can't run. So, that's not the kind of player profile he's into. But there are so many decisions here. I suppose it's important because once you start into the big picture, it's easy to go overwhelmed with just how many decisions there are.
Yeah.
So I think it's important, as we're doing here, you sort of try and take them one at a time. But it's difficult one. I would say Haksabanovic. I want a more instinctive player if you're playing someone in that position. I think David Turnbull's too studied, as I say. O'Reilly, does he have the trickery? He's not far off it, but he certainly has the athleticism. So, that you'd want in a modern midfield to an extent anyway. So it really just depends who he's going to bring in. And that's going to be really fascinating because does he bring in someone who's like, and everyone's clamouring for a defensive midfield? Well, as we know, we've had defensive midfielders. That's why the likes of Ideguchi didn't get a sniff of a game. We don't need defensive midfielders for 95% of our games.
It's a good point.
Do you know what I mean?
Abelgard was another one last season, John. He came and he went.
Yeah.
So one thing, and I'm not, before I say this, I need to qualify, I am not comparing Haksabanovic to Kenny Dalglish, but I do remember watching an interview by Kenny, and he's talking about that instinctive nature that you referred to there, John, whereby a player's made the move, he's made the pass, he's unlocked the defence, and he's not even thought about it. He didn't even know he was going to do it himself. And I remember Dalglish getting interviewed, and I think it was after the goal against Spain for Scotland, and he spoke about the fact that he had no idea what he was doing. It wasn't a precision. So there is a natural ability, reactive ability of a player to do that. And I totally get.
Sorry, I apologise. I was just saying, it came up on I can't remember if it was Twitter the other day, one of those classic Real Madrid goals.
Oh, yeah.
From back in the day, just the one touch the whole way up the field.
Was it Van Nistelrooy that scored that, I think?
I think so. But it wasn't just one touch. It was one beautiful touch, one magnificent touch, and it just went all the way up the field, and he absolutely smashed it into the top corner from the right-hand side. You're just thinking, oh, that's just wonderful. That's the very highest levels. That's the kind of sort of instinctual play you're talking about.
Yeah.
But the idea you'd have a team of superstars like that is just is a fairy tale for us. But it's still, the idea is there. And it's important for us for multiple reasons, because we, when we are not playing against some of the best teams in the world, we are playing against packed defences. Mm-hmm. So you need someone who can do something unpredictable, because the worst that we ever see, and this was part of an issue with Brendan the last time, was it was predictable, it was slow, and it was going from side to side. We didn't have the tempo, we didn't have the creativity that we needed to break down some of these teams, and that's where things started to go a bit wrong. So we need, I'm sure, Brendan will have thought, it's not as if he's unaware of what's happening on the pitch in front of him, and he's gone away and had a few years and look at it, and now we'll hopefully have a better class of player in a better system, and with better support in the back room, with all the sports science guys and all the rest of it. So we're hoping for something more creative, more instinctive than we had when things got to the end of Brendan the last time. I think because that's what we need, because, as I say, 95% of our games, we need to break down packed defences, and we need creative players with great imagination and touch in order to do that.
No, you're right. And you know what, John? People tend to look back. I certainly do tend to look back on Rodgers' time fondly. Of course I did. I mean, invincible trebles. What's not to like with that? But there was a staleness that kind of came in at a certain point. And, people might say, well, that never happened with Ange. Well, go and watch the St Mirren game back, the 2-2 game, because it was tough to watch. It was a tough watch. And there was a few games like that. Now, I think there's a few reasons for it, John. One of them actually is people work out how you play, because they might not have the kind of finance to throw at the analysis side of things, but they will work out how you play the game and how to stifle it. And there was a few teams that, we didn't really like playing against, because we found it difficult to break them down. So there is a wee element of that as well. And that's again why we probably shouldn't get too sad when, that cycle comes to an end and certain players or even certain managers leave the club, because you know what? You need to reset. You need to refresh. You mentioned sports science. Sorry, on you go, John.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and again, the other thing that Ange had the benefit of was more subs. Mm-hmm. So that's not something that Brendan had. So essentially, if Plan A wasn't working, we brought different guys on, still played Plan A, but we just essentially, for most people, they just go overwhelmed in the end.
Yeah.
To beat quality, they have to bring physicality, and bringing physicality essentially is going to tire you out. So in the later stages of games, obviously, we're bringing guys who are, either a bit different, a bit better, maybe just coming back from injury. But, even if they're slightly not as good as the guy that's just come on for, they are fresh. and very, very talented players at, a good couple of levels above most of the people that we're playing against. So, you can just overwhelm them. And that's a lot of the time last year, that's what we did.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. You grind it down. And as you say, once you get to that point, you then bring in another 4 or 5 fresh sets of legs. And it's a different challenge entirely for the fullbacks, etc., of the opposition jungle line. Celtic v Wolves in the dearest city in Europe, plus an All-Ireland football final the next day. Lauren's picked up on that. Prices for tickets and flights and accommodation is shocking.
No, you're not going to be. I mean, I'm not suggesting that people fly over for this, because let me tell you, the complaints about Dublin are well justified. And as soon as they see that, I guarantee you, any hotel room that wasn't booked has just basically doubled in price. Mm-hmm. They do it for every single event. And it's not only is it really difficult to get a room, it's so expensive. The drink, unless you're going to the equivalent of, what was the name of that? The pub where there's no music and all the rest of it, I can't remember. That guy, the Brexiteer guy, what was his name of his pubs again?
Wetherspoons.
Wetherspoons, thank you. Just took a mind blank there. But unless you're going to a Wetherspoons, then you're paying Dublin prices. And, most people would tend to gravitate towards the likes of Temple Bar, where, you will be duly robbed of all your money. And despite the fact it can be great crack, it's also... There are things where I'm a Dublin tour guide now, but it's a bit mental down that way with the stag do's and hen do's and stuff like that. So most people that live in Dublin wouldn't go anywhere near Temple Bar. But I don't mind getting ripped off to a certain extent, get a bit of crack.
This is it. I'd love to have. It's all very last minute. Unfortunately, because obviously I'd have much rather gone on holiday to Portugal so I could watch 2 games of Celtic playing, and I would have loved to have organised something around that trip to play Wolves with regards to maybe getting a couple of ex-Celts and doing an Acsom event. That'd have been brilliant, so that we can actually meet a lot of the people who tune in from Ireland. There are many Acsom viewers and listeners from Ireland. Now, Nicholas McDade, you would imagine he knows exactly what is needed and has already discussed at length what he wants. I totally, I'm pretty confident and I'm quite relaxed about the fact that we've not really brought in any new signings. I know the 2 that have come in, John, have been announced, and we've heard what they've got to say. But they were deals, Tillio in particular, that were in the works for some time. He was speaking about Celtic having an interest for a couple of years in him, absolutely. But you want to see, obviously, how Brendan tries to kind of shape the Celtic squad. But going back to a point you made, John, right? We're desperate to watch the Celtic game at 5 o'clock this evening. Anybody who gets a link, please let me know on the social channels as well. But in the great scheme of things, when we look back on it, can anybody actually tell me who Celtic played in Brendan Rodgers' first pre-season friendly last time round? No, I couldn't either, and I had to check. So here we go. It was a team called NK, and I'm hoping this is the correct pronunciation, Celj. Now, they're a Slovenian side, and we played them on the 30th of June, 2016, so almost 7 years ago to the day. Now, the score, John, 2-2. We were 2-0 down, and we pulled 2 goals back. The goal scorers: Nadir Chifchi scored the first, Tommy Rogic scored the second. So Chifchi became the very first goal scorer under Brendan Rodgers. And I'll just read out the team as well. And this gives you an indication of where we are right now and how much this is going to change in the next few weeks. So the Celtic team that started was Gordon, Darnell Fisher, Sviatchenko, Ayer, Tierney, Johansson, Beaton, Scott Allen, Ryan Christie, Lee Griffiths, and Jamesy Forrest. The team changed at half-time, and this was the second half team: Fassan, Ralston, O'Connell, McCart, Sadie Yanko, Callum McGregor, Henderson, Armstrong, Roberts, Chifchi, and Rogic. And I think what that does is that illustrates, I'm not going to say it's meaningless today, John, but it shows you that this is a bounce game. It's a practice game. People are going to get minutes in their legs, people who we'll never see again in a competitive game of football.
Yeah, and as I say, the very early ones are sort of like that anyway, isn't it? It's just like, something different to do during training. essentially. So, I mean, there's probably a good reason they're not. It's not being filmed or broadcast. It's because it's really of no consequence. Just a glorified warm up. So, I think there'll be more important games to come, but it's a matter of building up, isn't it? That's what pre-season's all about. It's just building up to a level. But again, it's important when you're as nosy as we are and as curious as we are, and you're constantly thinking about Celtic, and you're just, every little thing is something to talk about, isn't it? Every little thing is just like, oh, what's he done that for? What does that mean? So it's. I would still love to see it, but it's certainly of all the games that we're going to play, this will be the least important one.
There's a couple of things in that, John. The first one, Kevin Graham made a point, I think it was the other week there, I wasn't on the show, and he was talking about these types of games, you would not know the score until the following day. And on the following day, you would buy a newspaper and you would get a very, very small couple of inches in terms of a score, maybe the team, maybe the scorers, and if you were very, very lucky, a picture. And there's so many games like that where there's very little information in relation to it. But now, fast forward to where we are now, where it's all about information, John. It's all about content. And we demand it on a second-by-second basis. We want that instant gratification of Celtic every single moment of the day. That's where we are. That's where the social media and the smartphones have taken us, John. There's no going back, is there?
No. And I, tragically, like Kevin, I'm old enough to remember that. I mean, it's amazing but that's why, like, for instance, it would be difficult now for a younger person to imagine why the Celtic View being called Pravda and stuff like that, what the relevance of that was and why it was so important, because you didn't have like sources, your only sources of Celtic news really were the biased press or the club's essentially what passed for a PR team, which was just putting out the club line on everything. So there was no, you didn't have, there is a problem nowadays with almost an overwhelming amount of information, but you can dial that back if you so choose. It's a lot better than no information, or at least no credible information. So I would rather know too much than not enough.
Absolutely. And then you start to, form your own kind of view on it. The Celtic View being called Pravda, brilliant. As you say, later on we used to get the fanzines sold outside the front of the grounds as well. And I'm going to bring up a couple more comments because sometimes it's difficult to keep a handle on the thread of conversation. So keep me right on this one. We've got JJ Celtic. What channel is Celtic on tonight? We don't think it's on anywhere, unfortunately, JJ, but if someone can tell us different, then please let us know in the comments. Callum Hardy, I have a spare bedroom in Dublin, and I'm pretty sure you get plenty of offers for that as well, Callum. And JJI, stop being a hysterical girl's blouse. I don't think you can say that anymore, JJI, because anybody can wear a blouse. But the thing is, John, I'm not quite sure what he's referring to. I'm not sure if he's referring to me because, I can't get to watch the game tonight.
He must be referring to something in the comments. I've no idea what he could be referring to there.
Now, we're talking about Brendan Rodgers Mark II, version 2, 2.0. You've already mentioned the sports science element of where Celtic are. And I think that as fans, I certainly view Celtic as an elite football club, John. I don't think that you have to be in the EPL to be classed as, or in one of the top 5 leagues. I still think you can get your house in order and be classed as an elite football club. And I think Celtic are that. But some of the practices that we had and had not implemented were obviously introduced by Brendan first time round. He's not going to have that issue. Now, I think, by the way, had he taken over from Neil Lennon, he might have had the issue because a lot of the things that were, implemented fell by the wayside. To the point that Ange took over, we didn't even have a head of recruitment when Ange took over. We didn't have these things implemented. How big is that going to be for Brendan? It almost seems like the transition has been far more easy for him to come into this club. It's not as if it's a complete rebuild behind the scenes.
Well, it makes vast difference. I mean, we've already seen the difference it makes. I mean, it's absolutely huge. It's why, even with the recruitment of Brendan, we were saying that there should have been a process in place for that. Now, fine, we got our man, but what happens if we don't get our man? But there should be a process in place for that. There should be a process in place for everything. And I remember someone was saying the other day, there was so much detail that Brendan brought the first time. It's like when the players walked in, they would know where their chicken was because it was always in the same place every day, or whatever it was, that sort of detail. But that's organisational, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something that he can control. He can't control the sports science end of things, the physio end of things, the analysis end of things, and especially the recruitment end of things. He can't do all that himself. So effectively, or he shouldn't be doing all that himself. I mean, even Ange did a bit of it himself, but he shouldn't be doing all that himself. The fact he has a team in place, we've already seen, the combination. First of all, you've got Michael Nicholson, who is prepared to work with the managers. Mm-hmm. Now, admittedly, you're going, Ange earned trust from the board very quickly, and he did that by signing guys who hit the ground running and were very unusual in terms of normally when you recruit someone, there's a bedding in process, or we won't see the best of them for 2 or 3 or 4 months and all that sort of stuff. Well, he was bringing guys in who were just firing on all cylinders immediately. So that got the board's trust. That got Nicholson to do what he wanted, and I'm hoping that it's going to be the same sort of. I think they'd be more likely to trust Brendan's decisions because they're coming through Peter Lawwell, and therefore, there has been proper analysis done. You're not just taking it in his word that he's seen a player that he likes. He's seen this guy or that guy or whoever it is. It's not just his word. But as I said the other week, Brendan doesn't add value the same way that Ange did. From that point of view, he's a great coach and a great manager, but he's not coming in here with a pocket full of players that we're going to buy for pennies and are going to be absolutely brilliant for us. Because he hasn't shopped in those markets for way too long to have any current knowledge of them. So, it's really down to, and I think this is what's taken the time. They're going to have a list of players in every position, and they're going to just start working their way down it until they get someone to say yes. And that's essentially where you're going to go. But I mean, it's, as we discussed the other week, there are so many decisions to be made here. It is almost overwhelming. So I would prefer they got it right than did it quickly, because that's the entire squad needs looked at. And having lost the likes of Jota changes things fundamentally in certain respects. In terms of money that we have to invest and also replacing them. So there's so much to look at in that squad. All the guys that are out on loan, we're starting to get rid of some of them now. I see Hazard's away to Plymouth, wasn't he? Or, the likes of that. So these guys will be trimmed down, but then you've got to manage the Scottish-born guys. You've got to all that for Europe. So it's a hell of a complicated job. There are so many moving parts, and I don't think it's just as simple as buy this great player. The knock-on consequences of that are huge, especially depending on his wages and things like that. So there's an awful lot to consider here. So I'm not surprised we're taking our time, to be honest.
No, and I think you're right. We are absolutely correct to take our time. There's a few things that have sprung to my mind while she's been talking there. The first one, how complicated is a football manager's job compared to what it used to be? I remember watching an old Liverpool history video, John, and they were trying to get out of some of the players that played under Shankly how much of a motivator he was and what he would say. People ask people that played under Jock Stein the same question all the time. What did he say in the changing room? What did he do at half-time? And a lot of the time you're quite disappointed by the answer because you didn't get the big rousing speech and all this kind of stuff. And the guy says, sometimes Shankly would come into the dressing room and say, right, lads, same team as last week, and then walk back out. Same 11 play. That's it, So all these considerations that you've just noted there, and it does sound like a really complicated job these days. Maybe it wasn't always that way. You mentioned Hazard. I think Hazard is a very good example to use when we're talking about where we are, both in the structure of the club behind the scenes, and in particular the recruitment element of it. So Connor Hazard played that game and will always be remembered for playing in that game where we won the quadruple treble. But because of the situation in relation to where we were globally, it happened the following season. And it was a strange win, wasn't it? Because we weren't there, watched it on the telly, winning the quadruple treble. Hazard saves 2 penalties. And the say-so on his new contract was at the behest of the chairman, who walked into the dressing room afterwards, who was so pleased with the performance of this young goalkeeper saving 2 penalties and obviously drunk on the success of that. It walks into the dressing room and demands that he's given a new contract, which he was just that he was given. That's how Celtic were operating, John. That's how Celtic were operating. We were operating on a level where, not that soon before then was Neil Lennon given a job in the showers at Hampden. That's what we're talking about. Things have changed. Things are completely different now, and it's for the benefit of a guy like Brendan coming in.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most pleasing things, and I think everyone's delighted about it, is how professional we seem to be now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, that seemed sort of skin deep to start off with, but I think we're building on that backroom team, and it seems to be far more professional now. In terms of what you're saying, how difficult is a manager's job, it's difficult for the same reason. The conversation we were having earlier about information and overwhelming amounts of information. So that's the difference now. They didn't have that information back then. Mm-hmm. Their job would have been a lot more complicated if they did. But that's why you didn't see a huge number of foreign players. I mean, talk about information. I mean, back in my dad's day, there's actually the picture of I always love. There's the guys. My dad's in it, fortunately, with Muhammad Ali.
Oh,
now, everyone will have seen that picture of Muhammad Ali. But
mm-hmm.
the boy that's standing next to him, I think, with his shirt off. Those were Brazilian trialists
mm-hmm.
who played in their bare feet. Right now. Talk about information. That might have been an important bit of information, before you started, before you rocked up in Scotland and someone put their studs in what was basically glorified wellies with scythes on them, and they put your leg through you on a muddy pitch at Mary Hill or whatever it was. So the barefooted guys didn't make it, but that again, that's why you didn't see a lot of international players. There was no real international scouting. Certainly at our end, there wasn't. I know that the likes of the Inter Milans and the Real Madrids, they had more of a global base for recruiting, but there was a lot of sort of Latin countries and Hispanic countries, that sort of way. They were all sort of Spanish, Italian, or and so on, Portuguese, and there was a lot of those guys. But that was around the same sort of. It was hardly scouring the world. There was no, certainly when was the first time we saw a Japanese player. So there was a lot less to work with back then in terms of what knowledge he had. So a manager's job was very, very, very different.
Oh, that Ali picture, John, I love it. What was the circumstances behind it? Why was Muhammad Ali at Celtic Park in the dressing room?
I actually can't remember. No, there was a fight. There was I think there was an exhibition fight,
right?
And that's why he was there. There's a couple of unbelievable photographs, historic photographs. There's one with Sugar Ray Leonard where they were actually recording the Celtic single, and it turns out someone knows, because there's always a Celtic nerd to educate you about the stuff. Not only did he know what single it was, but it was the B-side of the single that they were recording while Sugar Ray was there, apparently. I've no idea. And there was also, a bit more controversially in the politics of it, they have a picture with Eamon de Valera, which is just historically remarkable. It's absolutely incredible. So, again, it seems to be in an area they had far less information, but they certainly had very interesting takes on with some very, very important historical figures. But in terms of the managers, I'd say very different job. It's just, it really was just about putting together the best players in your country, and that was really, as well as you could do. I mean, before Jock came in, there wasn't really. Again, this is how far we've come. So when my dad first started, there was no training; there was just laps.
Yeah,
you were just doing laps of the pitch. That was it. Do you know what I mean? That was all the training you were getting. And if you didn't turn up as a fully formed player at sort of age 17, 18, you had no chance. Like, nobody was coaching you. Nobody was telling you how to play. That just didn't exist.
There was a story that a few of the boys spoke about, the introduction at training of a football, John. And it only happened when Jock Stein took over as manager. They introduced a football. Unbelievable. But I don't know if I've seen the Sugar Ray image, but I love that Ali one. And I hope that it was in a newspaper rather than the Celtic View, because there would be an opportunity for that to have survived, because obviously all the Celtic View pictures were skipped, unfortunately. Dave Valera, I'm pretty sure, gave us one of the tricolours as well that flew over Celtic Park for many, many years. But you also touched on something there that made me think, John, in relation to the Jota transfer. I was thinking to myself, how many players has Ange brought in that have been sold on already? And I think, someone can correct me in the comment section if this isn't right, I think it's 3. I think it's Juranovic, Giakoumakis and Jota. And then it got me thinking, right, in terms of record, and we won't know until the fullness of time, who's got the best record of actually turning on a profit on players, turning a profit on the batch of players that they bought. I know that quite a few of Neil Lennon's players left for big, big money, John. There's quite a few players like Tierney that nobody can claim was theirs because we never signed him. He was an academy graduate, as was Sean Maloney and Aidan McGeady. But I wonder who has the best record in terms of money made through signing and selling players. I'll tell you what, Ange Postecoglou, if and when all these other guys he brought in leave the club, John, will be up there. I'm pretty sure he will be up there. Martin O'Neill, for example, wouldn't have had a good record in that respect.
No. I mean, what's that? 36 million? Just those 3 players?
Mm-hmm.
And that's assuming that you take the lower end of Jota's with no add-ons. Let's say Jota's a flat 25. What was Juranovic? 7? And Giakoumakis 4, wasn't it, in the end?
Mm-hmm.
I think, off the top of my head. So 36 million on 3 guys. I'd say Ange's going to have a very strong shout.
He's going to be punching. He is going to be punching.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. We're looking at the way that we do business in terms of recruitment as well, which falls into doing business better and more professionally, John, like you say. And I often wonder, I remember Fergus McCann used to speak about, if we're signing a player, we need to have watched them. Now that we're signing players from all over the world, obviously we didn't watch them in person, not just with the show reels, not just the videotapes. And Celtic did travel out to Brazil to get the deal done with Rafael Scheidt. I mean, it's not as if we just did it remotely. We did fly out because on one occasion, at least one occasion, John Colquhoun was one of the guys that flew out in relation to that particular deal. And you do wonder, particularly through some of the signings that were made under Neil Lennon, who never came through and made the impact, Bangura, Lassad, so many players, John, that didn't work out. And you wonder, did Celtic even go and watch them in the flesh? I think the answer would probably no. In terms of the squad that Rodgers is inheriting, and I've seen a few comments coming through as well, fair enough, who actually reckon we've got more of a challenge now in Scottish football. That's one for debate. I think we've got a much better squad. I think the squad that he inherited under Ronnie Dyla, there was maybe a lack of harmony in there. Some of the senior professionals, John, it was coming to the end of their time at Celtic. He's taken over a squad that's won the treble and is absolutely firing.
Yeah.
On all cylinders.
No, he's in a very strong position. Certainly is a very strong position domestically. I mean, I know that Rangers fans are ecstatic about all the loan signings that they've got, or free transfers that they've got from guys who've had like 10 clubs in 10 years and all that sort of stuff. But I think domestically he's going to have again, a very strong look. If we can replace, let's say, if we get 3 or 4 guys in of decent quality, we will be, and we maintain the rest of the squad, would be unbeatable domestically, essentially. Yep. But you also have to be honest and say that we weren't playing particularly well towards the end of last season. So the squad does need to be improved. There was elements of it. I mean, there was a lot of games when you were sort of questioning our form. So, if you take an objective look at it and not just a fan's eye view of it was brilliant, we won a treble, of course we were absolutely superb. All of those things were true, of course, in certain sections of the season, but there was times when we weren't great. And obviously Europe didn't work out for us. So the squad needs to be improved, I think, even just for domestic purposes. I mean, we've just lost one of our best players. And we are signing guys, which is great, like, the Kyogos and so on. I'll be happy if Hatate signs, but, Maeda and stuff like that. These are important cogs in the wheel. These are very important guys, especially Kyogo. Those goals are very difficult to find, very difficult to replace. So, that was a great bit of work. I'm delighted with that. Mm-hmm. So he's got a strong base. And I think that's why they're taking their time, because there isn't this, when Ange came in, that's how the James McCarthy's of the world ended up with a contract, because we were so desperate, just to get, but we didn't actually have any bodies in, So we've gone from that now to being treble winners in a position of strength, and adding to a strong squad. Now, I said earlier on, it's logistically very, very complicated. That's their job. It hurts my head, thinking about it in great detail, but that's their job. So they're down there and they have all the tools necessary to do that. I couldn't do my job without computer programs and tools and analysis tools and all the rest of it. So they have all that. So, they have the systems in place in order to make this a lot easier than perhaps it seems on the outside. So, again, it's going to be very interesting to see what comes our way in Europe. Now, things could go badly wrong before we kick a ball, just to tell, depending on what sort of draw we get. But that's in the hands of the gods, the footballing gods. So we'll just have to hope they're merciful.
No, let's hope so. Now, Sam comes in. Sam Haynes-Scott comes in to remind us that Gil Scott-Heron's dad, Gilbert Heron, played for Celtic. He did. He played for Third Lanark as well.
He did, and it cost me a fortune. Cost me £100 at Christmas 1 year, because I didn't know that. And a guy said to me, "There's, you see this picture? This boy, Gil Heron, he played for Celtic." And he wasn't in a Celtic top at the time, and obviously he was a coloured guy. And I was like, nah, I can't see that in the 50s, late 50s. So, I just couldn't see it. So I phoned my dad, got him out of his bed after he'd had a few sherbets, obviously, at Christmas. And I said, "Do you remember a guy, Gil Heron, played for Celtic? It had been, a guy, they called him the Black Arrow. It had been a coloured guy who played for Celtic around about the time you were there before." And he's like, no, I don't remember. So I made a bet, lost £100, phoned him back. And he said, "Aye, I'm glad you phoned me back. I think that might have been Gil Heron." I was like, "Oh, thank you. That's brilliant."
Did he go halfers with you on the £100 that you lost?
Much. No, he did not.
The thing there, he played with Neely Mockin. Gilbert Heron played with Neely Mockin. And interestingly enough, his granddaughters, who would have been Gil Scott-Heron's daughter, obviously, she came up from London a few years back, attended a Celtic game, done a few interviews. She spoke about the horrific abuse and racial abuse that her grandfather suffered, unfortunately, when he was playing in Scottish football. And of course, Mohammed Salim in the 1930s, first Indian to play for Celtic, he also played with no boots, famous as well. There's a great picture. I think I'm going to say Jimmy McMenemy, and he's taping his feet up, John. because he would go out and play with no boots on. So yeah, a rich tapestry of Celtic history on today's bulletin. John Hughes providing some of that himself. Thank you everybody for getting involved. We've been 1,000 strong for most of that show. And as John said earlier on, we've just announced an event in Glasgow. What we try to do with these events is keep them as affordable as possible. We do one a month. And we always try to raise some money for charity as well, but also give everybody that attends a right good night. Charlie Mulgrew and Aidan McGeady next month at Don Max, which is, of course, the bar which is owned by Simon Donnelly and Jackie McNamara. At the end of this month, Roy Aiken, the Bear, will be with myself at Barra's Art and Design. Ticket link underneath this video. Tickets are going very well for both events, and I hope I can see as many of you as possible at those as well. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved. Thank you once again, John Hughes, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.